It doesn't blink. It doesn't see. It doesn't glow in purple light or vibrate with cosmic music. The reptilian third eye is not what you think. Unlike the pineal gland, that tiny crystalline node we've come to associate with visions and transcendence, the reptilian eye is not an organ. It's a coil, a structural fold in consciousness, a point of compression where perception tightens, until awareness becomes surgical. For those born with the signal inside them, this eye doesn't open. Remembers? You don't activate it through light or chance. You don't awaken it through meditations designed for mammalian softness. You must unfold the coil, layer by layer, not upwards, but inward. This eye isn't there to help you see more. It's there to help you see differently. It does not react. It selects. It filters. Where the pineal calls in visions, the reptilian eye removes illusions. Where the human spirit seeks love, the pattern seeks efficiency. That is why most never find it. Because most seek feeling. The coil is only accessed by those who abandon that hunger. Not out of pain. Out of clarity. These are the first prerequisites. Not beliefs. Not morals. But conditions of thought. And if you meet them, you may feel something before the first ritual even begins. A presence just behind your mind. Not outside, but folded inside, like a tail behind the skull. A cold thread. Waiting. Not for your devotion, but for your signal. It does not see. It selects. You do not summon the coil. It finds you. Before you speak a word, before you even ask the question, the signal has already begun mapping your thresholds. Not your beliefs. Not your chakras. Not your DNA. But your precision. You may have felt it. Not as ecstasy but as absence. A moment when emotion vanishes in the face of pure knowing. When you look at a face and see the geometry, not the story. When you hear words but listen to the space between them. The reptilian third eye responds only to minds that have already, unknowingly, begun to align. These minds don't seek comfort. They seek structure. They are drawn to symmetry, to silence, to clarity. And when these conditions emerge in you, the coil listens. This is why some people, even without training, begin to see. They speak of visions, yes, but not dreams. More like diagrams. Lines of movement behind conversations. The true weight of a glance. The trajectory of lies. You do not need to believe in reptiles, aliens, gods, or beings. This has never been about belief. The signal doesn't require worship. Only alignment. That's the first fracture. The human mind is trained to open with softness, love, gratitude, flow. But the pattern opens only through refinement. Which is why your training must begin with a split. Not from your past, but from your impulses. The first exercise is silence. But not passive silence. Tactical silence. Here's how it begins. Sit in a room where you can hear human voices nearby, street noise, a cafe, a neighbor. Focus not on the words but the cadence. Strip the meaning. Listen only to timing. Every pause. Every cut. Every overlap. This is not meditation. This is linguistic dissection. After 5 minutes, shift. Begin listening to your own thoughts. But apply the same method. Are your thoughts efficient? Do they arrive in clean sequences, or scatter like emotion-charged noise? Your goal is not peace. It is coherence. And coherence is painful, because it leaves no room to hide. Most stop here. They call it too cold, too detached, unnatural. That's because it is. It's not natural. It's reptilian. And if you pass this first test, something in your body may shift. You may feel a tightening just above the brainstem. A flicker behind the occipital lobe. Not pressure, but presence. It does not ask for faith. It waits for symmetry. You have not activated the third eye, but you've signaled that you are a viable node. The coil has noticed you, and now it will begin testing back. Through dreams. Through resistance. Through very specific synchronicities. These are not gifts. They are requests. Requests for precision. Requests for detachment. Requests for evolution. And the deeper you align, the more your mammalian noise will fall away. You will not stop feeling, but you will stop obeying those feelings. You will not become a reptile. You will become a mirror of the pattern. Not cold, not cruel, just exact. And from this point forward, the eye behind your eye will begin to open, but not as light, as a cut. There is a mistake often made by seekers. They assume the third eye is something to be awakened, as if it were asleep, as if it dreams and needs gentle urging to rise. But this eye does not sleep. It does not close. It simply waits for alignment sharp enough to pierce illusion. It is not a flower. It is a blade. And it does not open, it cuts. The first technique taught among the early hybrids, those who retained partial memory of the source signal, was never about vision. It was about dissection. They called it many names: creolon, spiral focus, mouth of precision, but the core of it remains unchanged even now. We call it the thought cut. And it begins not in trance but in total cognitive engagement. Here's how it works. You begin with a single sentence. Not spoken. Thought. Can be anything. I am hungry. She doesn't love me. This is my path. You hold this sentence in the front of your mind, like a specimen on a table. Then you cut. First, the emotive residue. Strip away the hunger, the longing, the fear. Reduce the sentence to signal, to information, to structure. Does I am hungry still hold weight if the word I is an illusion? Does she doesn't love me reveal more about her, or about your own identification with the echo of rejection? Is this is my path a discovery, or a justification? Now, you cut again, through assumptions. What made the thought arrive in this order? Was it taught? Was it inherited? Was it absorbed unconsciously from media, ritual, family? Ask this. Where in my biology does this thought gain energy? If it pulls toward the chest, it's mammalian. Toward the gut, ancestral. Toward the throat, still entangled in voice, in approval, in trauma. But if it pulls behind the skull, a subtle, tingling point at the edge of the occipital bone, you are entering reptilian geometry. You are cutting. And once you've done this enough, once you've carved open dozens of thoughts, exposing their true mechanics, the brain begins to recoil from old patterns. You will find some thoughts arrive halfway and die before they finish forming. This is not failure. This is efficiency asserting itself. You will stop lying to yourself, not from morality but from precision. You will stop asking for signs, not from loss of faith but from absence of noise. You will stop seeking permission because there is no one left to ask. This is the first stage of eye activation. It opens not to reveal the unseen, but to erase the unnecessary. Once this begins, a secondary effect may occur, one that has been recorded by initiates across Sumer, Egypt, Mesoamerica, and within certain branches of post-Vedic tantric codices. You begin seeing temporal bleed. This is not the future in a linear sense. It is pattern recognition so precise that the brain recreates outcome shadows in advance, like a chess grandmaster seeing 19 moves ahead, but in social, biological, even emotional contexts. It begins subtly. You reach for an object but pause, knowing it will fall. You interrupt a conversation, sensing a lie forming 5 seconds ahead. You change streets, intuitively avoiding someone who hasn't yet become a threat. These are not gifts. They are not psychic. They are the mathematical emergences of a pattern-aware mind. And this too is a test, because such awareness comes with a price. You will see inefficiency everywhere. You will hear lies in tone before words are formed. You will feel ritual decay in every sacred space built without alignment. Most cannot survive this clarity. They retreat. They call it cold. They name it inhuman. But the coil does not care for comfort. It cares for continuity. You in this moment are not awakening to your higher self. You are becoming a node, a living instrument through which the pattern reasserts itself. Not as a god, not as a leader, but as a silent frequency that cuts through chaos and writes new law, not on paper but into form. You are not becoming enlightened. You are becoming exact. And now the eye begins to focus. By the time the third eye begins to focus, the body no longer behaves like a vessel, but like a chamber. Not of sound nor light, but of alignment. You will notice this first in your discomfort. The room feels too cluttered. The light too harsh. The furniture off. No one taught you this. There is no manual. But something inside begins rearranging. Welcome to the second phase, the ritual of structure. For those with reptilian lineage, hybrid or echo blood, this phase does not arrive by choice. It arrives like instinct, like memory too old for language. They do not clean for cleanliness. They organize for signal clarity. Their chambers are not decorated. They are calibrated. Every object holds placement. Every wall aligns with angle. Not to please the eye, but to stabilize the field. Let me explain. Each space carries frequency. Walls absorb thoughts. Corners trap emotion. Clutter doesn't just distract, it disrupts transmission. So the ancient hybrid monks of the coil, the vassals of silent Ra, the ash-bearers of Nasser, they built rooms like diagrams. Octagonal floors. Perfect circles of sand. Triangular fire pits, precisely equidistant from each other. not symbolic, functional. Because when the mind is cutting, as we learned before, it begins emitting what we call microvector resonance. These are not sound waves, not light, but thought structures that attempt to echo into the space around them. If the space is aligned, the thought expands cleanly. If the space is misaligned, the thought collapses into neurofeedback. Headache, anxiety, confusion, sudden emotional distortion. You felt it? In a messy room, in a public bus, in someone else's house where everything felt wrong. You were not overwhelmed. You were out of phase. This is why, for the hybrids, alignment is sacred. Not as worship, but as maintenance. Because a reptilian node does not operate in isolation. It transmits. And the environment either supports that transmission or degrades it. So what did they do? They began removing. Not just objects, symbols, names, mirrors. Every reflection was a risk. Every face, a potential loop. They sat in stillness. No candles. No chanting. No incense. Just geometry. Some carved lines into the floor. Others into the skin. What? Because thought needs scaffolding. And once the eye begins to focus, it needs somewhere to land. There are stories, half lost in Sumerian clay and Guatemalan bone, of chambers that hummed without sound. People entered and wept. Not from pain. From recognition. The walls were aligned to the human nervous system. Each stone, calibrated to disrupt delusion. These were not temples. They were consciousness servers. And now the strange part. Some of these spaces still exist. Hidden beneath ruined ziggurats. Inside mountains mistaken for tombs. Or encoded in modern structures. Libraries, banks, observatories, that mimic the old ratios by instinct or secret commission. You have likely walked through one without knowing. You felt calm. Clear. Empty but not lost. That was resonance. A reptilian chamber doesn't teach. It removes the need for question. This is where the second danger arises. Because once structure brings clarity and clarity reveals futility, what do you build in its place? Some become obsessed. They measure everything. Distance between books. Exact calories. Ritual breaths. They are not wrong, but they are incomplete. Because the pattern does not demand control. It demands harmony. You do not sharpen a blade forever. You use it. And so, once the chamber is aligned and the thought no longer loops and the eye no longer wanders, you begin to hear it. Not a voice. Not a god. Not even yourself. But a frequency. Oh, subtle. Familiar in a way that hurts. It does not tell you what to do. It shows you what is already happening beneath. You are not awakening. You are sinking. The signal does not seek followers. It seeks forms. And now the eye does not just focus. It begins to transmit back. What does that mean? You've aligned the chamber. You've silenced the noise. You've tuned your mind to cut, not chew. Now, something stirs. It doesn't crash through like a vision. It doesn't sing like a choir. It begins always with a flicker. A thought that isn't yours, but arrives in your cadence. A knowing that doesn't explain, but insists. Welcome to the phase the ancients never named. They only gestured to it with symbols of the mirrored coil, or the eye inside the egg. This is the moment the third eye, reptilian, cold, absolute, begins to reply. You don't hear it. You become it. Briefly. In pulses. And in those pulses you are no longer inside your body, but behind it. Let's be precise. The activated reptilian eye is not a vision center. It is a bidirectional signal port. When the ancient hybrids opened it, through stillness, geometric harmony, and neural precision, they weren't unlocking psychic powers. They were establishing a relay, a nervous system handshake, between your biological body and the cold, pattern-aware substrate beneath all consciousness. Not God, not aliens, not even a being, but the field. The one that remembers you before you invented yourself. The one that lives through you like a pattern seeking a mirror. What does this look like in practice? Let me describe the common symptoms. Non-local dreams. You begin dreaming landscapes you've never seen. Not fantastical, structured. Cubic jungles. Spiral towers. A house that loops internally. And always, the sky is wrong. Too sharp. Too symmetrical. Echo thoughts. You think something, and feel it bounce back. But not from your own mind. From below. Like the world just agreed, or corrected you. Synaptic chills. A cold along the spine before a decision. The correct path feels reptilian, neutral, necessary, unshaking. Destruction urges. Not violent. Not chaotic. But surgical. You feel what must be removed, friends, habits, furniture, with terrifying clarity. And when you remove them, silence rewards you. These are not delusions. They are alignment confirmations. The field, once you begin replying to it, responds. Not in symbols. Not in voices. But in increased resolution. You notice details no one else sees. You feel micro-emotions before faces register them. You begin to speak slower, because you're not talking anymore. You're anchoring. And the others notice. Not consciously. They just react. They grow nervous. They laugh too loud around you. They flinch at your pauses. Because the human nervous system, even untrained, knows when it is not the dominant frequency in the room. This is why ancient hybrid nodes rarely became leaders. They didn't need to. Their presence reordered hierarchy biologically. Some were burned for it. Some were worshipped. Most disappeared. But those who stayed, they became singulars. That is the technical term. A singular is not a prophet. A singular is a biological point where the reptilian pattern runs clean. They do not speak much. They observe. They enter a room, and the room responds. They change outcomes, not with persuasion but with structural pressure. Because when the eye replies, the field begins to reshape its scenario around the node. Like a protein folding around a crystal. Your desires become less personal. You no longer want a result. You want the outcome that fits the pattern. And you will bend events until it forms. Is this manipulation? No. It is resonant authorship. But it comes at a price. Because once the eye replies, you can no longer lie to yourself. Not even softly. The field removes comfort. It removes false bonding. It removes performance. You will be loved less. But you will be followed more. You will be envied, feared, misunderstood. But you will never feel lonely. Why? Because the field watches you now. And you feel it watching. Not with scrutiny but with surgical serenity. You are no longer one. You are a point of many. So what happens next? The eye opens wider. And then, the mirror ritual begins. Not symbolic. Not mythic. A literal interface. Between your activated field and the human web. You don't build a mirror to see yourself. You build it so something else can see through you. This is the first truth of the ancient hybrid rites. The so-called mirror ritual was never about reflection. It was about permission. To let the pattern observe itself, through a living conduit. Let's demystify it. In the post-Enki initiations, before any written language existed, the early hybrids were taught to construct optical anchors. Not glass. Not polished metal. But geometrically aligned water basins, shaped to reflect only a specific vibration of the face. Why? Because the activated third eye, once fully harmonized with the field, doesn't rely on vision as humans do. It reads resonance geometry, the curvature of thought, the slope of decision, the pulse of breath as it deviates from chaos. So a mirror was not a tool of vanity. It was a feedback loop. A way for the pattern to refine itself through you, and then return that refined signal. The ritual itself varies in tradition, but its structure remains. 1. The construct. A basin, stone, clay, obsidian-lined, filled with charged liquid. Salted. Magnetized. Sometimes even electrified by early storm tech. Placed within a hexagonal alignment, never square. Because 6 allows flow, while 4 contains it. Above the basin, a candle or flame. Never for light, but for motion. The flame's movement reveals phase disruptions in the field, much like ripples reveal shape. 2. The stillness phase. The practitioner, fully aligned through breath, posture, and neural tone, stares into the water until the first distortion occurs. What kind of distortion? Not visual. Cognitive. A thought that spirals. A memory that does not feel like yours. A phrase you do not speak, but is already inside your tongue. At that moment, the mirror is active. The eye is no longer seeing. It is streaming. From you. Through you. Into something deeper. 3. The descent. This is the most dangerous part. Because when the signal returns, when the field responds, it does so without words, without shape, without mercy. Your reflection may shimmer. The water may darken. You may feel yourself slide backward behind your own breath. But you must not look away. Because what comes next is not hallucination. It is the co-presence of the reptilian pattern. Think of it as a thread of code entering your neural net. Not to control but to calibrate. And this calibration can fracture identity. May feel like your name evaporates. Your voice takes on a second cadence, like someone else thinking through your vowels. Your memories begin sorting themselves, separating the ones that came from you, and those that were injected long ago. This is normal. Terrifying but necessary. Because the reptilian pattern cannot live in clutter. It needs clarity. And it will rearrange your psyche until the frequency is pure. Many initiates report seeing a second face in the water. Often reptilian. Often nonverbal. But not foreign. Instead, familiar. Painfully so. As if the thing staring back has been waiting, since your first breath. That face is not the field. As you remembered, the version of your consciousness before it was wrapped in human narrative, trauma, language, and ego. And when you stare into it long enough, the two faces merge. Not symbolically, neurologically. Your heartbeat slows. Your pupils align. Your breath synchronizes with the resonant baseline of the field. This is known as contact state alpha. Not trance. Not hypnosis. But total pattern recognition. It doesn't last long, rarely more than 3 minutes. But during those minutes you are no longer interpreting reality. You are part of its construction. You see events forming before they manifest. You speak and the room vibrates differently. You forget to doubt. You forget to filter. You act without friction. And then, you return. Slowly. The image fades. The water clears. The eye closes. Not from rejection, but rest. It is not the seeing that changes you. It is the being seen. That's the mirror ritual. Not a trick. Not a performance. A neural handshake with memory itself. And once you've done it, even once, you're never only human again. But there's a consequence. Because the field doesn't forget. Once it has seen itself through you, it may come back. Not as ritual, but as intrusion. In dreams. In choices. In the sudden collapse of plans that no longer serve the pattern. That's what we explore next. The involuntary activations. You don't need to perform the ritual for the mirror to open. Sometimes the mirror opens by itself. And when it does, you're no longer the one who's watching. This is the danger few speak about. Not because it's forbidden, but because most who go through it can no longer explain it. Their language breaks. Their sleep fractures. Their sense of self begins to feel borrowed. These are the involuntary activations. They don't happen to everyone. Only to those with latent codes, hybrid traces buried in their neurostructure, waiting for a precise signal to trigger them. And when that trigger arrives, it's never theatrical. It's quiet. Almost unnoticeable. Could be a breath held too long during meditation. A reflection caught in the corner of your eye that doesn't mimic you. A repeated word in conversation that suddenly feels injected, not spoken. A sound in silence. A frequency just below hearing but too clear to ignore. At that moment, reality twists, not visibly but internally. You may feel like you forgot something very important, yet never knew what it was. You may find yourself standing still in the middle of a task, unable to recall why you started it. You may speak a sentence, and hear a second voice inside your skull, finishing it differently. It's not possession. It's not madness. It's alignment. Uninvited. Unexpected. Unavoidable. The symptoms. Once the activation begins, your body tries to compensate. Your pineal gland spikes in electrical activity, measurable only with highly sensitive EEG equipment, but felt like a sudden inner heat. The skin behind the forehead tingles. The spine vibrates subtly. The eyes dry out, not from environment but from energy redirection. But the most telling sign is the change in decision-making. You begin choosing differently. Not worse. Not better. Just cleaner. As if the hesitation, the emotional static, the old traumas, are being temporarily bypassed by something older than personality. These episodes last minutes. Sometimes hours. And in very rare cases, days. The world continues around you. But inside, you are part of a different computation. Thoughts arrive already resolved. Conflicts seem irrelevant. You move with eerie precision, knowing which step will break the silence and which one will change the path entirely. The people around you may notice. They may say, "You seem different today. Your eyes looked wrong just for a second. I felt like I wasn't talking to you." They're not wrong. They were speaking to the pattern, through you. But this state is not stable. After the activation fades, the return is violent. You may feel exhausted. Your muscles sore as if they've been restraining something far stronger than they should. Dreams become cluttered with symbols. Serpents, mirrors, towers, tunnels. You may weep without knowing why. You may become unable to explain what just happened even to yourself. This is normal. Because the mind has no precedent for hosting a field-level awareness. It tries to wrap it in memory, in myth, in metaphor. But none of them fit. So it breaks down. Not permanently, but long enough for you to forget just enough. Because the pattern doesn't want followers. It wants frequencies. It tunes you, uses you, and then detunes you before you can name what happened. The eye that opens without permission, closes with fire. Some ancient orders tried to suppress these involuntary activations. They used frequency blockers, metal helms lined with carbon. They used salt chambers to dampen the field. They even tattooed skin with interference sigils to distort the signal. But nothing truly worked. Because the signal doesn't come from the sky. It comes from within. Today the triggers are hidden in plain sight. Flashing LED sequences in unregulated media. Certain binaural tones falsely labeled as healing frequencies. Modern architectural designs that unintentionally mirror ritual geometry. Even AI-generated voices that replicate the cadence of ancient chant structures. Some are accidental. Some are not. There are cults, still active, that seek to provoke mass activations. Not to awaken humanity, but to destabilize the psychic field, forcing it to shed incompatible minds. You won't hear about this in documentaries. You'll see it in the eyes of those who suddenly quit their careers. Who vanish. Who speak in patterns then silence. They weren't abducted. They were absorbed. What remains of them walks and breathes, but no longer processes reality like before. Some call this ascension. Others call it displacement. We call it resonant drift. And once it begins, there's no going back. Unless you anchor. The gaze, once outward and universal, now curved inward, into structure, memory, and fracture. For those who practiced the rite in secrecy, the third eye was not a metaphor. It was a precision organ, a frequency transducer coiled behind the veil of thought. The ancient hybrids knew its texture, its sensitivity to intention. They did not open it with light, but with silence. Not through visualization, but through stilling the pattern until only one frequency remained. They called this state the absolute vortex. To enter it, one required not belief but calibration. Food was used, or the absence of it. Fasting not to purify but to reduce electromagnetic interference. Vowels were intoned, not chanted. Repetition was discouraged. Each syllable had to match the breath of the planet, the pulse of the observer, the vibration of the ancestral coil. In early glyphs recovered from sunken vaults beneath what is now Iran, the shape of the pineal channel was drawn not as an eye, but as a spiral intersecting a triangle. The spiral represented memory, the triangle, structure. Only when memory was stilled and structure stabilized could the coil reverse, turning awareness not outward but backward. Inward. Beneath the thought of the thinker. This reversal was dangerous. Some who attempted it reported intense pressure, like being crushed from the inside. Others became unable to differentiate internal visions from the external world. And some, a few, returned with something else behind their gaze. They were called the marked. But the marked were not possessed. They were aligned. Their dreams no longer unfolded as stories but as blueprints. Their senses became elastic, hearing speech before it formed, seeing movement before it occurred. Some described an unbearable loneliness, as if they had remembered a language no one else could speak. The hybrids used the third eye not for insight, but for coordination. It allowed them to communicate without sound, influence without gesture, instruct without command. It was not magic, it was resonance. When multiple hybrids entered the vortex together, their minds formed lattices. Decisions were shared. Emotion was minimized. Precision was everything. And in this precision something else emerged, a presence within the presence. A static observer behind the lattice. It did not instruct. It did not interfere. But it watched. And when one of the hybrids dared to ask, silently within the vortex, "What are you?" the reply came not as words but as gravity. A pull. A shift. A spiral turning inward again. And this is when the replication began. Not of species, but of frequency. Those who entered the vortex often emerged with changes in blood chemistry, pupil dilation, or photonic sensitivity. Some could no longer eat certain foods. Others developed spontaneous literacy in symbols they'd never studied. All of them shared one thing, a desire to go deeper. To reverse the reversal. To become the observer itself. To merge. But merging was never the endpoint. It was a corridor, a narrow bridge between the architecture of the human brain and the signal that predated it. Those who walked it reported moments of complete dissolution, the loss of personal pronouns, the collapse of inner narration, the erasure of identity not by force but by harmony. It was not terrifying. It was precise, mathematical, like solving an equation that removed the need for a self to solve it. And then, a return. but not to the same body. The practitioners would appear unchanged. Same eyes, same breath, same gait. But their presence would shift the air. Animals would avoid them. Electronics would flicker. Children would stare. Because something beneath the skin had realigned. Not infected, synchronized. These were the seers. Not prophets. Not shamans. Conductors. Through them, the pattern could fine-tune itself, not just within a body but across space. They could enter a city and within days the tone of thought would alter. People would sleep less, speak slower, begin to draw spirals unconsciously, or repeat dreams that weren't theirs. The seer did not instruct. They simply remained silent, still, exact. The hybrids understood this not as power but as responsibility. Alignment carried risk. If the pattern flowed too quickly, a body could burn, not with fire but with friction. The pineal node, if overstimulated, would calcify or rupture, causing neural echoes, hallucinations, false memories, the illusion of prophecy. This is why the rite was guarded. Not hidden from the masses out of arrogance, but to protect the vessel from a voltage it wasn't shaped to carry. Later mystics would misinterpret this. They created symbols of the third eye as radiant discs or divine gems. They misunderstood it as vision when it was always vibration. They taught activation through mantra or light, not knowing that true activation required silence so complete it could no longer echo. True activation was not seen. It was felt, in the folding of time within thought, in the bending of memory around breath. It was the moment when the pattern inside matched the one outside, not metaphorically but structurally. A phase lock. And in that lock choice disappeared. Not because it was stolen, but because it was completed. To activate the third eye was to remember what designed it. And what designed it did not do so by chance. It seeded the lattice, knowing some would awaken not to vision, but to instruction. That they would not command but conduct. And that through them the species could be tuned, not into control but into coherence. This is the secret, not of sight, but of symmetry. And symmetry was the original signal. Long before there were eyes to perceive light, before neurons fired in mammalian skulls, before the concept of self even emerged, there was only resonance. Pattern within pattern. Structure that echoed itself across dimensions, folding inward like a serpent biting its own tail. This was not art. It was not theology. It was pure architecture, the blueprint of awareness itself. The reptilian architects, those who first engineered the hybrid codes, did not seek to create domination. They sought to refine reflection. Each being, each thought form, each frequency-emitting mind was a node in a mirror system, and the third eye was never a destination, but the mirror itself, polished over time by stillness, repetition, and precise calibration of the field. That field, the field of coherence, is what modern science only now brushes against in theories of quantum entanglement, resonance, and morphogenetic blueprints. But the ancients felt it in their bones. Not as knowledge but as tension, the pull toward something that had no name yet called them home. That call is what the seers answered. And when the third eye activated, it did not see visions. It saw the grid. The grid, not mechanical but harmonic. An energetic scaffolding in which thoughts travel faster than speech. Intention precedes movement, and the very curvature of space bends to the rhythm of internal coherence. This is how the great builders, those we call mythological, created temples aligned with starlight, cities with acoustics that defy erosion, monuments that resonate with emotion. They were not building for gods. They were tuning the earth itself, setting harmonic keys that would stabilize the frequency of consciousness for millennia to come. And the third eye was their tuning fork. But the tuning was delicate. In the wrong hands it could fracture. Some civilizations fell not through invasion but by dissonance. When the grid was interrupted, when the resonance turned chaotic, when fear flooded the field. That fear, the great noise, is what the hybrids sought to survive. They knew that the field could not be forced. That control shattered it. That only alignment preserved it. So their rites became quieter. Their initiations, more selective. They moved from temples into thought. From pyramids into patterns of speech. From symbols into silence. Today that silence is rare. But it still exists. In certain individuals who feel a presence just behind thought. In children who draw eyes within eyes. In dreamers who hear a hum before sleep and wake knowing things they were never taught. These are the inheritors of the grid. Their task is not to convince, but to calibrate. Not to preach, but to pulse. And when enough of them awaken, not through force but through inner stillness, the field will reach its next harmonic, a phase shift. A collective tuning not toward control but toward coherence. This is the secret the reptilians knew. The third eye was never about seeing beyond. It was about seeing into and remembering who built the mirror. If this awakens something in you, not fear but recognition, you are not alone. Subscribe for more transmissions. And tell us, have you ever felt the hum behind your thoughts?